Hello, everyone. This is Ashley Pitzer, and you're listening to Practicing Life podcast. I'd like to welcome a guest, Jenny Grace, who goes by Jen, to Practicing Life podcast. She is an author of Dehumanization and a public motivational speaker, educating the world on abuse and that human trafficking still exists. Jen is also an artist and runs an art workshop. One of her specialties is reinventing art from junk. I'm grateful to have you on my show today and for you to share your story, as well as the fact that I know that you're really passionate about helping other people and, just preventing other people from going through what you went through. So, welcome, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. It's good to be here, and thank you for, having me on to be able to speak about this, which I find is very, very important to be able to discuss child abuse. I think we as a society want to hush it up, and it's an uncomfortable feeling, but that in itself allows it to continue. And I just believe that, my life journey, there's a purpose to it, so that I can share and I can educate from my horrific experience to help, build somebody else in a positive way. So it's a bit like my art. I use junk, and as I'm designing something, creating something from what somebody have discarded, you make it beautiful. And this is what we do with one another. We create something that, and it doesn't matter how difficult your past is, we can create something beautiful, but we need people and we need others to be alongside us in that journey to do that.
Yes. Yes. And I just so the audience may know that we don't know where this conversation is going to go, but Jen's going to be talking about her past. There is going to be discussions about abuse. So if there's any children that are in the background, you might want to save this podcast for later. You never know. So anyway, yeah, I would agree with you. I think that it is a challenging subject to bring up, and I'm really grateful that you are, courageous and bold and willing to use your story to help others. So let's hear about your story and why do you speak out against abuse?
I think I was silenced for so long. I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. The silence, the ignoring, the denial. And I think I showed signs that things were wrong at the age of 4 years old. And yet I was denied any support, any help, and actually wrongly labelled at the age of 11 and sent to a psychiatric hospital and diagnosed with schizophrenia, which again, I'll talk about that in a moment. But, with that, there's so many children being labelled. So we label our children so easily without looking at the real issues. And I don't want that. I don't want children to be able to suffer. Our children are our treasure. And unless we start to, guard that treasure and protect it, then, how can we build a foundation? We can't. We have to be able to, kind of like safeguard the most treasured possession what we have, and that's our children. And that's why I need to speak. That's why I want to speak. And that's why I aim to, to be honest and as truthful as I can throughout my journey, the rest of my life.
Yeah, like one of the things, because I was my story is going to be different than yours, but in my childhood I had child abuse, and growing up we would have, I don't know what you guys have in the United Kingdom, but out here we have DFM services, and they would come out to my house and they would check things to make sure everything was kosher. They came all the time, but the problem is that I was always living in fear, because what was always beat into my head, was you don't tell anybody about this. Like, and so I actually had selective mutism because it was so reinforced in my childhood to be silent, don't talk to people, they don't need to know our business. Like, and I will tell you, and this is one of the things that I kind of like, I'm still searching out as an adult is in my mom's, viewpoint. It's like this didn't happen. She would have never been married to somebody who abused her or her children. And so you're left as the, child who's an adult now, the adult child, being like, okay, well, I don't talk about this with my mother. And how much am I okay talking about this outwardly, knowing that it may impact her?
I hear what you're saying, but then again, for you, it must be that secret again. That sword is your secret because you're trying to navigate protecting other people than your voice being heard. And this is one of the things that I strongly believe. People think because they've been abused once, twice, many times. It doesn't matter. Once is bad enough. It's the fact that you've been abused, and I just feel that we have a voice. And like yourself, I was a selective mute for many years. I decided not to speak because I wasn't being heard. I wasn't being helped. I was actually being labelled. Everything I did or said, there was somebody writing something down about me, and it would be completely different to what was going on. I was fostered in a very at that time it was a very rich neighborhood. It was a farming village, and me and my sisters were the only black people there. So we weren't very, in the 1970s, we weren't welcomed anyway. So our we weren't, because we weren't welcome, we weren't heard or seen. So we could have gone through so much and nobody would have helped us, and that was what happened. We went through so much and nobody wanted to help us. Everybody was trying to toe the line of, oh, we better not help them because what would Joe Bloggs think? Or we better not do this, because they wanted to keep up with the Joneses. And it's in this, and even to this day, it still happens. We're trying to think about how would somebody else think instead of how does the victim feel? How does that child feel? It's not about anybody else. It's about how we feel. If we want to speak about it, we can, because it's what's happened to us, and it's not a secret anymore. It can't be a secret. We can't close that lid because it's our past, it's our journey, and it's what's molded us. And it's not, we, because of the way that we've molded, we've got notches on us. All these notches that are not, I don't like the word imperfect, but I'm going to use that word for the moment. These notches are a resemblance of how we were treated, like, the things where if we told what would happen. So you have a notch developed on you, and it's attached to you, and it's embedded, and I call it the embedded internal tattoo. And it's basically each notch resembles what they did to us, and how you can to remove those notches if it seems impossible, and at times it is, because sometimes we go down the road and we can walk as if nothing's happened, or we may not remember anything. Then something reminds us of something, and we're right back there. And then you get people saying to us, oh, it's a past. Why are you being so silly? That's all done and dusted. But it's not. It's there. It's real, and it's affected us. And that's how deep the abuse affects people. It goes deep, and it's like you can't just remove it. Nobody chooses to pick it up and carry it and walk with it. It's not as easy, and I wish to goodness it was. But this is why it's so important that we as adults in this world need to stop hiding behind what's uncomfortable. Oh, don't say it's all in the past, because we're enabling it, and we need to start saying and start educating and allowing people to speak and say their truths, so that, and if it feels uncomfortable, well, you can do something about it and help prevent it. And that's what it means. When somebody in the family abuse you, it's not because you want to cause a problem. It's the truth. And the thing that we have to recognize, that's the truth. It doesn't matter. It doesn't take away the person who wasn't the abuser. It doesn't take away their character, because they've been deceived as well. But you can't keep on protecting someone because they want, it's too painful, and or they can't deal with it because it's so damning. I'm physically ill because I've kept it in for so long, and it's caused me so much physical illness, and that I will never have those years back. And my lifespan is shortened, but I can use it to help someone else, prevent them from keeping it a secret, and to help people to say, right, let's see how we can help them, And I think this is it. We've got to start listening.
Yeah, and I'm going to just take a moment here to backtrack for my listeners, because I am a coach and hypnotist, and I always like to educate whenever possible because the brain is so powerful. And so when Jen was talking about those notches, whatever you want to call them, scars, we all call them different things. And basically what happens is when you have, if you want to use the word, a traumatic event, or you have something that was highly intentionally intense emotions, and that is not a safe environment for you to express, then it gets suppressed into your body. And that trapped emotion starts over time it's trapped energy. Emotions are energy. And so that trapped energy starts to wear down other things within your body, which is why many people who have had trauma or have had sexual abuse or child abuse, they later come up to have chronic illnesses that, and it can show up as cancer. It doesn't have to be a chronic illness. These are kind of things that happen. And so when Jen was talking about, you can be an adult and all of a sudden you're in this moment, something comes up and you're reliving something from your childhood. That is because that energy, that memory is all stored. And so when your subconscious programs not only the emotion, it programs a memory, a picture in your mind. And so whether it becomes conscious to you or it stays unconscious to you, your physiological responses happen. You might feel the jaw lock up, you might feel sweaty, you might feel your heart racing, even if you can't remember the memory. And so this is one of the things, like, this is a lifetime thing until you can release the notches, the scars, the healing, you can let it go. That past is always being brought to the present until it is released. All right, go on.
Yeah, and thank you, Ashley, because that's where we develop DID as well, because when we're trapped in such a sordid environment, each of our every trauma that we go through, we form a different ally, and that's the ally is part of our coping mechanism. It's all of us, it's all of me, but it's parts of me that has to develop. Say, like, for example, if my foster family thought I was more valuable as a male, then I become a male, and depending what age that was enforced to me, then I become that age. If someone, so example, if they wanted me to be this pretty little girl who sang and whatever, then I'll be this pretty little girl who sung and everything like that. It's ways that you can develop to please, and then you have these parts of you also that develop through trauma. So you basically, when you're going through that trauma, you have this part of you who carries a certain trauma, so that you can cope. The only way that you can cope is that your being carries pockets of your trauma, and those pockets are called disassociation. So you disassociate from the trauma, and each of them have memories. So I've got memories of from baby up until now, and even as adults, we do, survivors of adults, we do disassociate when things become too much. We can so I've just been diagnosed with MS, and I still haven't got round to it, but I've allowed myself to disassociate from it. So it's me, but it's not me, and that's how I'm dealing with it, which is not healthy all the time, because there's times where I have to join and I have to accept things, but then we all need allies. We all need somebody who can help us along that road. And so many times that people have avoided or wanted to pray over me, saying I had the devil in me because of what happened to me in the past. And I'm smiling because it's that lack of knowledge that breaks a person. I think in some ways, I'm more traumatized by the way people responded after I told than as a child, because I didn't expect anything other than what I was going through because I got so used to it. And that's sad to say that. But, so it's just, we need to kind of like, it's a bit like, I don't know, in the USA, that you have neighborhood watches and things like that. So people kind of like join allies and look over their neighborhood and making sure everything's okay. We've got it here. And I just always believe that we have neighborhood watches, and it's mainly about burglary. It's mainly about, petty things, or children hanging on the streets and things like that. But why don't we have it where we look after our neighbours and we actually look out for our children? Say, for example, a child's playing on the streets and all of a sudden they're not there. Well, just to make a phone call around, just say, did you see that child once? So we know where that child is and it's home safely. That's fine. But, just being more observant, because people do curtain twitching. People do look out the window. So why can't we use that for the best? And, and things like that.
It's definitely a different world. I mean, our generations are changing constantly. And I know we're moving into a technology world where people are indoors and they're not really interacting with people. I mean, I can tell you that one instance maybe doesn't make me look the best as a parent, but during one of the times that my teenager was going through a rough time, they broke open a window and sat on the top of our roof, which is a high-pitched roof. And one of my neighbors saw this and called me. I was home. I didn't hear my kid.
No.
And so they're like, did you know your kid is on the roof? And I was like, what? It's an accident waiting to happen. And so, I'm getting my kid or whatever. And that neighbor I happen to know and we have a good connection with. But there's plenty of neighbors on my street that I don't even know their name. And I've lived here for 10 years. It's just a different world now.
It is a different world, but we've made it a different world.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think we can actually change that. I think we've become too scared of one another, and or we've become preoccupied in our own self and our family setting, and where we miss out on the community spirit. We can. I don't. The thing is, we can't rely on the government to help us.
Well, they're only going to help in the ways that they can help, and like they don't always get the funding. They can't always find the people. Their hands are tied too.
Exactly. So but we can as neighbours, as communities, we can do it. And I think and things have changed. Children don't go out so much; they are at home. But even just listening to a constant cry, or that screaming, or something changes. Because sometimes you can walk past someone's house and you'll notice a change. You may not know what it is, but you'll notice a change. And you just keep an eye on that. Yeah. And you just write something down, note things, just and it may not be nothing, but it's just being vigilant.
Yeah, I know there was a situation in my life where one of my kids' friends, they spent the night at a friend's house, and a incident happened over there, and my kid called freaking out. And when I came over, there was more than just my daughter. And so I picked up my kid, and I picked up the person that was living there as well as another kid, and took them, because for me, like, I'm recognizing all the signs of danger and I'm not okay with this, and I'm not even going to leave the one kid that's there, that lives there. I'm like, I'm taking them all because safety is so important to me. And this parent came to my house later, so not in a good mental state at all. And this person is somebody I would have considered a friend. And it didn't matter at that point. They weren't my friend. What was important was those kids and
Yeah.
whether or not they were safe. And so I did not care that this person was upset with me and yelling at me and hated me at that moment. I could have cared less, because what
Yeah.
mattered to me was that the kids were safe. That was the bottom line. And that was, a really hard wrinkle in a friendship and a relationship. But you set your boundaries with everybody. Whenever you are dealing with somebody, however they are treating you, however you are reacting to them, you're creating a relationship. Even
Yeah.
if it's like somebody that you don't know their name, like, so the neighbors that I don't know, I'm creating that relationship. I'm responsible for that. I'm allowing that. I am tolerating that. I am responsible for my boundaries and what I have in my life.
Mm.
And so there is a certain amount of, passing off, I think, that we are taught to do. Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's somebody else's problem.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And it's not. I think because I just so want, we want to leave a legacy, don't we? And a really good legacy for our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren. And that does start with sieving out all the cesspit of, and that it's not always a pretty sight, but we can clean it out and start a great foundation. But it does take many hands, and it has to take many wants to do it.
Yeah.
And this is why I felt I build up my what I know, what I've gone through, to enable other people to understand. I'm not here to say this happened or that happened, that shouldn't happen, because my past has happened. I can't go back and change it, but I can help somebody else's path be a smoother ride. And that's my goal. And so when I go around speaking to different organizations, I just speak with sincerity and knowledge of what it's like to be kind of like wrongly labeled, the telltale signs, the equipping, people with what's the best way to help a survivor. And also the fact is we don't talk about the grooming. And I
What
think
was
that
that?
the grooming,
The gluman?
grooming, grooming.
Is there a different word for that? I'm trying to figure out what that
Oh,
means.
so basically where somebody comes alongside the child and sweet talks him and
Oh, okay.
and then they've got the child. We don't talk about that, and that's where we need to kind of like start the subject on, and we kind of like how does a person get into that person's life?
Yeah.
How can we prevent that? How can we see the signs of that? And that's where we really need to start our subjects on and things like that.
So in the United States, they have like a program in school as well as the DARE program. And so they do talk about predators essentially coming up to children with candy, a puppy. I know as a parent, when my kids were little and I was at a park, I called the police on somebody because somebody came up behind me. My
Uh,
kids were in front of me playing on a playground. Somebody came up behind me and started a conversation, and they stayed behind me, which meant I had to keep looking over my shoulder to talk to
mm,
them.
mm, mm.
Meanwhile, somebody took my kid and dragged them into the trees, and I happened to hear my kid scream. I was distracted looking over my shoulder the entire time. So I
Mm.
called the police and those people left. Um, and I know that they do education around here about these kind of dangers and the things that you have to look out for. But I would say too, I mean, one of the things that we're also knowledgeable about is almost all, not all, a good percentage of abuse happens to those that are closest to you, not a stranger.
Very
What
true.
would you say about that?
I agree with that, but we, that's very true. But it's also how they go about that. and it is the slow, kind of like being the best, picking up on their person's insecurities, promoting them, giving them favoritism and things like that. And I think in the UK, we don't hardly ever in schools talk about the process of that. We're quite, it's kind of like we're far back in acknowledging this. We are so way back in acknowledging that it happens in this country. And this is where, and this is where we as survivors are speaking. There's been people that have been arrested and sentenced to high sentences for speaking and then being called a liar because it's honestly, because it's such a taboo subject. So people don't talk, especially when it's organized and it's some people in high places. You can't give names, which I understand because it's, until that person's kind of like dealt with, arrested, then you can't. But if you do, or you talk about it in a way, you could be arrested and you can be sentenced to a quite a hefty sentence. And I think we have platforms on our social media saying this doesn't happen. We're fancy, it's all a fantasy and things like that. So it's kind of very hard to get through that. It's like getting climbing up a stairway with honey, because it's just like there's honey and soap, and we're just slipping over ourselves because nobody's really acknowledging. There's very few, and there's very few organisations that will help us. Mental health don't have training for abuse victims. They have. When I say they don't, they started to. So in their 3 years of training, they'll have 3 hours of abuse.
Not much. That is not
under
much.
the same umbrella, and we don't have specialist people in mental health to deal with it. We all fit under the same umbrella for counselling and things like that. Whether you got trauma or you got personality disorder, schizophrenia, or whatever, you fit under the same umbrella for the same counselling, and that's where that's where we've getting it wrong, because there's a lot of survivors who are so destroyed that they're not moving on, and because there's not the help. And I've been fortunate that I've got some good friends. I've got a very good counsellor now. I didn't have all that, but I had my son, who I needed to be of relatively sound mind, so that I could keep him safe. So that was my way of dealing with things, and it wasn't the best of ways because it also caused me internal injuries and things like that, and I'm not well. But we need, and this is why I just want people to kind of like say this happens, acknowledge this happens, because then you're saving so many lives, you know.
So that's actually one of the things, like I remember when there was a sexual assault on my life and they wanted me to speak out against the person. And they go from that angle. They go from the angle of you're talking out will help prevent this from happening to all of the other people. But one of the things that they don't really address, for my perspective, is, well, talking about it feels really shameful. Letting everybody know what happened to you feels really shameful. And so there's this bridge of crossing, like, yes, you want to help all these people, but in the meantime, I got to cross this, like, oh my gosh, the world now knows all these things and I feel, and when you're doing your speeches, do you talk about this? Do you help people through this?
I do talk about it, because when I wrote my book, I was so ashamed. I felt so embarrassed, ashamed, actually filthy. And but as time went by, I have received so many positive comments. I actually used that to think, wow, these people don't see it as a shameful thing. They're actually, building up their lives because they've read this and that. And so you kind of like, you learn to think it is, it's a gift, that you've been able to write it and you've been able to share your life to someone, and so they can help rebuild theirs. So it's not so much of a shame now. I do have moments Especially when you have someone who says, oh, you don't want to discuss that's disgusting, you don't want to talk about that. That's when I have that shameful moment and things like that.
And it's really their shame that's coming
Yeah,
out.
yeah. But you can't really pass that to them, because and then
No.
you take it on for a little while. But yeah.
I do find, for most people, myself, I mean, as a child, I wrote a lot of poetry. So you can see, even in my childhood, I was using writing to express myself. And I could say things without directly saying them in poetry, and my child, it's the things that he has gone through. His art, oh my gosh, his art, when I look at it, I'm like, oh, you got some dark spaces, honey, but I'm really happy that this is one of the ways that he can express it and, heal through it, and we can talk about it as it comes up. But I do find that a lot of people writing their story, whether or not they share it, is a huge healing process.
Yeah, because you're pouring out. It's like that cesspit I was talking about. The more you put the lid on it, the more the heavier it becomes and the darker it becomes. But you open that door and just writing words down and whatever. It's like a freeing. You're letting that out, and it's it's regurgitation, isn't it? Regurgitating all that stuff. So yeah, there is a freeing in writing. And I'm like you. I used to write poetry, do art, and it was all kept in secret. But it was like I had one over on them, and it was powerful.
Yeah. I think when, as a child, being silenced so much, written word is very powerful.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would also say too, just as in like another point with how your brain works, right? When you're writing and you're speaking your truth, even if it's disguised, even if it's disguised, you are still helping to release some of those trapped emotions.
Yeah.
So let's get to your book. You wrote the book, Dehumanization. How long ago did you write it?
So I wrote my first book in 2009 called Nowhere to Belong, and it was under my pen name, Harmony Books. It was written, I got it published by a publisher, but I could only say so much because the law was different then here, and you couldn't really say what I was being able to say in here. And I always promised that I'd write the full story. And so when did I start writing again? About 2015, I started writing the full story. And then I met Sam. I finished it, and I thought, and I met Sam through somebody that Sam knew. And Sam edited it for me, and we managed to get it into a book form and have it published in April this year.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. And for those of you who are on YouTube, you can see the copy of the book. I will put the links in the show note for those that are audio listening. And just for reference, Sam was someone who I had on the podcast a few episodes ago, and Sam Houghton. And she is a ghostwriter. She's a book coach. She helps a lot of people because she's an empath. She helps a lot of people with some of these harder stories to share, the stories that, people try to sweep under the rug. She's so good at helping with those type of stories and bringing them out, which is both healing to her and healing to the other people. I would definitely recommend her. You can look at her website, the show notes, whatever you need to do to check her out. So, and this is how I got to know Jen here, which is absolutely wonderful. And I'm so glad that Jen is sharing her story. So now
Sam is brilliant, and I advise anybody who's wanting to write a book, contact Sam, because she is brilliant. She really is an empath. So yeah,
exactly. And so now you've gotten this book, and did you have speaking engagements before this, or did they come like after?
I had speaking engagements before that. I've spoken in several different organisations. I've spoken in Parliament. I've spoken in with the Metropolitan Police. I've spoken in schools and community events. I've set up community events myself and spoken with them. And then we've got a mental health organisation which I used to work for, Mind, and I spoke a lot there while doing creative groups with people who suffer from abuse. So I set up creative art groups and things like that with them.
Yeah. So like, just to kind of circle back, so a lot of your story is about the fact that you went from foster family to foster family. You had this one predominantly rich foster family.
No, so I didn't go foster family. I stayed with this foster family. I went to so because my behaviour started to deteriorate, I was sent to, it was called in those days, naughty children's units. So they used to have respite, and I used to have to go there sort of like for a week or 6 weeks holidays and, you know, things like that. So I was moved around all around the country to go to these different places. And they were very similar. There were, you know, children were moved around, farmed around. And I saw some absolutely horrific things that, you know, the organisations were involved in. And but it was like, we didn't have anywhere to go to because we were children nobody wanted. So our voices weren't worth being heard to anyone. And that was, and I'm saying from my part, my story, and it's, you know, there were other people who've gone through abuse for different reasons, but this is our journey. And it was so hard because the more you try to tell, and you say it in child words, your behavior, or you kind of like, you don't speak or something like that, but you're labeled. You know, I was labeled with schizophrenia at the age of 11 years old. They didn't have a bed for me in the hospital, so they put me on a geriatric ward. So I was on this ward with elderly people. I was a child. I was given ECT, reeled down. Nobody explained anything to me because I didn't feel that one, you know, I was worth explaining to. It was all kind of like orderly, you know, dictating what I'd be doing, move me around. There's abuse after abuse. And you form this this alliance that you don't trust anybody anymore. So you're very alone. And then, you know, so I grew up being alone in the world. And then I have a child. I have a relationship. I have a young child. I had a child. No, let me go back on that. Sorry. I had a child. Sorry, I thought movement. I had a child at the age of 14. I lost that child. Then I had another one at the age of 16. She was with me within the foster home. She was a result of my foster father. And she became a certain age and they started grooming her. And I had to lie to say she, because with that, remembering that I was diagnosed with being schizophrenic. So every time I tried to get help, they blamed it on my illness and sedated me even more. So in the end, I had no choice but to, in the middle of the night, I wrapped my daughter up. She was 6 years old. And I went down to the phone box and I phoned the police and said I was hurting my daughter. That was the only way I could get her to safety. And I'd lost her. She was adopted within 3 months. Nobody wanted to hear what I had to say and the reasons why. And then later on, 10 years later, had another child. And, you know, he is the most amazing young man I could, you know, it's just awesome. We've been on a journey together because with organised abuse, people think, well, it finishes when you, after your child. It doesn't. Majority of it doesn't. You are owned. You know, you're owned by them. And so my journey is that they didn't leave me alone. They kept on following me. They'd break into the house. They'd hurt us. They hurt my son. And it got to the point we had to move over 30 times trying to flee from this organised abuse. And what happens is the leader could die, somebody else takes it over. So it's not the same people, it's just and the only reason they were hounding me because they didn't want me to speak.
Yeah.
So when I wrote my book, I found and it's taken me all these years to realise that speaking is our safety. So when I wrote my book, we were free.
Yeah.
And we are free because I spoke the truth. Me and my son spoke the truth. And
I mean, that's what's so interesting about it. I mean, I know that if you're like me, you've probably heard that when you speak, it brings light to something. And when there's
Mm,
light, there's less shadows. And so it does take, because in your child mind, I wasn't able to process that speaking brought light, and that would make these things disappear in my life essentially because they don't want to be where the light is.
mm, mm.
And as an adult, I can definitely understand this, but when you're young and the way you process things is quite different. Your
And
ability to think through things are different.
yeah, and I think as an adult, because you're so, it's mind washing because you're so trained. Because I remember my foster mum sitting me down and practicing over and over again what I should say, how I would sit if somebody asked or said something to me, and so you're trained to
Mhm.
say the right words, behave in the right manner, so that to the outside world everything's hunky dory. So you're so trained, and the consequences if you didn't get it right was devastating. So as an adult, you're going into this, like, to say something about what was happening and go into detail. Some people knew little bits, but could never ever explain to people. Some of it was because people really didn't get it, and so to me, it was just like there's no point in explaining because I'm wasting my time. But also the fact is, I didn't know how to explain it. I was still trapped in that mind wash of don't tell or something,
Mhm.
this and that, or something devastating will happen. And that's where you kind of like, you really believe it because these are your caregivers who will, you hang on to their every word.
Mhm. And then also the way your brain works is you don't have the critical factory in your brain until you're at least like 8 years old. So
Mm,
everything that comes into your brain until you are able to question things, everything up until that point is accepted as the absolute truth in the way that it is. And so when you have 8 years of this is the way it is, even when you have the ability to question something, you may not question it because it is your truth. It is
yeah,
your reality. It is your belief system. And it isn't until you get older that you can, and you get exposure to different things where you can
mm,
be like, oh my gosh. And this is why Jen's work is like so important because she's helping to get the exposure. Like when she's speaking out about her story or, writing her book or going to these speaking events, she's helping to create a new point of view for anyone out there listening. And then that new point of view might tickle your brain to say, wait a minute, like that makes me think of this, and it
mm,
may make you question something. And that is where the true power exists, is being able to question your own like thoughts and your own reality.
yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Mm,
So,
yeah,
well, go ahead.
I've been was just thinking as well is that also the way that social services came into our homes, they would arrange appointments with the foster parent. They would look into one room which was kept absolutely pristine clean, and then they would use that as their everything's okay. You didn't ask us because these were pillars of the community. So these foster parents, people idolized them, thought they were wonderful, taking in people like us. So what they saw in that one room was the tick box that they needed, and off they go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also want to touch in before we wrap up and everything too, because I have a child that has autism perspective, diagnosis. And one of the things that I learned early on is when many kids with autism, they don't speak. And because they don't speak, they may have more behavioral problems. And one of the things that you learn is that those behavioral problems aren't because they have some type of diagnosis that they need to be labeled with, but this is the only way they know how to communicate. And basically, Jen is kind of drawing something very similar, is that
Yeah,
kids may be having behavioral problems as a like hello red flag sign, like help me, this is the
yeah,
only way I can talk to you. But because we don't have any in the medical profession, we don't have any mental profession, or very little, I should say, because there is some that
mm,
exist, and they don't cross paths. Like
yeah,
with my child with their diagnosis, you go to physical doctors to help with physical symptoms, but there's also behavioral issues. And when I go to the government and my kid has, disabilities, I can talk to them about, oh, my kid needs adoptive equipment. Here's a physical help. But when you ask them about, well, how do I deal with this behavioral issue? They're like, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
We don't touch mental issues.
Yeah.
We don't help you with this. And so there is this huge space in our world about mental illnesses and whether or not they truly are mental illnesses. What type of help do you really need? How can you heal from it? Versus like just going to medicine and saying, well, this makes you more acceptable to me.
I think it is about seeing the person as a whole, and we can't do anything other than that, because if we don't, then you're going to have people wrongly labelled. You're going to have people not treated properly and appropriately for different illnesses or different ways of behaviour. See people as a whole. Talk. Even if you don't know about mental health, you can pick up a phone. You've got the computer. Talk to somebody who is working with that person to get some idea of what, and then map. You could do a health map and things like that. They could do, and try and work it out with yourselves incorporated with that. So we're always working with each other. The medical staff, ourselves. Our children, but incorporating it all as one, and it's as easy as anything. It does sound so simple, but it seems so. It just seems so far apart from being reality, and I think that's where part of the system which is broken.
Yeah, and it's just an education process, and it's not that they're trying to do anything hurtful. It's just an education process.
It is, but I think it's not. That's not trying to do anything hurtful. But it's about trying to listen to people. If it's not working, why isn't it working? And I think that's the issue there. It may not be doing it purposely, but then there's a choice in helping and listening and seeing a different way of doing things. And it'll save a lot of money as well.
Yeah, because mental health care does cost quite a bit.
Yeah.
All right, so Jen, people have the book that they can go out and buy this from you. They could probably.
Yes, so you could Dehumanisation, a true story of organised child abuse, written by Jen and Samuel Grace. It is you can buy it from Amazon, either as e-Kindle or as a book form. The book form is £12 and the Kindle is £5.99. You can also purchase it from me. If you want to purchase a copy, find me on Facebook, Jenny Grace, or email me on handsthatcreate@icloud.com. So that is hands, HANDS, create, CREATE, @icloud.com.
All right, perfect. And gosh, I felt like there was one. So I just want to ask you really quickly. I don't know if it was released. I'm not educated on what movies you guys get in the United Kingdom, but over here, we recently just had the movie release, Sound of Freedom. Did you guys have that? What do you think about that?
I've got a lot of questions, if I'm totally honest.
Okay, fair enough.
That's all I can say. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so, and before we wrap up, is there any takeaways that you would like to share with the audience? Like if you are going through this, something similar, where would you guide people to? What would you suggest for them? What would be ways that would be helpful?
First of all, I would say, if you're going through this, please don't be ashamed, because it's not your fault. Pass that shame on to the perpetrator. Secondly, I'm proud of you, and and also where you can get help. I'm not sure there's support in the USA, but in the UK we have very few. You have 1 in 4. You have clinical dissociation. You have Mind and different organisations of Mind all around the UK. those are the three people that I would say, oh, a NAPAC, or I would say would be able to support you. You know, also write a journal. You know, start, if you can, even if you can't put the words together, you know, form pictures, cut pictures out of a magazine and put a collage together of what your thoughts are. It really does help. It helped me, and you know, and it does form some kind of understanding and unravels what you're collecting here and what you're feeling in here. It's not the be all and end all, but it just helps until you can find the right support. Just hang on in there. And I know it's a tough life. You can contact me on my email or Facebook. You know, I'm always there to listen, and don't suffer alone. Just remember, it's never your fault. Okay, and respect.
Thank you so much for sharing those. Thank you everyone for listening. And just as a reminder, you matter. And until next time.